70 million people killed. But that wasn't the worst part of World War II. World War II officially started on Friday, September 1st, 1939 at 4:45 a.m. The world woke up to German tanks rolling into Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany, and history was rewritten in blood. You were told the Nazis were defeated, that justice was served, that peace returned, but that's not the full story. The war never really ended. Behind every battle was a deal. Behind every speech, a strategy. Behind every hero, a shadow. This wasn't just a war for land, it was a war for power, profit, and something far darker. Before the bombs fell. Why World War II really started. Most people think World War II started in 1939, but the fuse was lit long before that. After World War I, Germany was crushed, punished with massive debt, starvation, and humiliation. The world thought that would stop them from ever rising again. Instead, it created the perfect storm. A young soldier named Adolf Hitler returned home angry, broke, and bitter. And by 1933, he was in power, promising to restore German pride, rebuild the army, and erase the shame of defeat. He wasn't alone. On one side, you had the Axis powers, Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, Fascist Italy. On the other hand, the Allied powers, Britain, France, the Soviet Union, the US, China, and others. In 1939, one invasion lit the match. Britain and France responded with war, and the world slipped into chaos. Cities burned, families shattered, more than 70 million lives gone. And decades later, we still don't fully understand what it was all really for. What school skipped. In school, we got the cleaned-up version. Hitler rose. The Allies fought back. Nazis lost. But this version skips a lot, like the fact that IBM's machines helped the Nazis track Jewish families across Europe, or that Ford and General Motors manufactured trucks and engines for Hitler, even as Allied soldiers were dying. And Standard Oil? Secret deals with Germany kept their fuel flowing. They weren't breaking the rules, they were writing them. They were part of the machine of war and profit. War is a business. It's not that they forgot to tell you, it's that they chose not to tell you. War is expensive, unless you own it. Germany's war machine was fueled by American technology, Swiss banking, and secret trade routes. Some U.S. banks even loaned Hitler money in the 1930s. Meanwhile, companies like Coca-Cola simply created a new drink, Fanta, to keep selling in Nazi Germany during trade sanctions. When there's blood in the streets, some people panic, others write invoices. The propaganda war. While tanks rolled in Europe, another war was being fought inside people's heads. Joseph Goebbels knew the power of storytelling. He was Hitler's minister of propaganda, but more than that, he was a master manipulator of narrative. He didn't use tanks or guns, he used stories. He once said, "A lie told once remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth." He weaponized emotion, twisted facts into fiction, and turned entire nations against themselves using nothing but words. He turned hatred into loyalty, turned fear into obedience. But here's the part they always leave out. After the war, the U.S. hired Nazi propaganda experts to build media influence models. They didn't want to destroy the Nazi brainwashing techniques. They wanted to own them. The seeds of modern psychological operations were planted in the ruins of Berlin. History wasn't written, it was edited. What you know is just the polished part. Like, comment, and subscribe to Dark Decode because truth doesn't fade, it gets buried. The cruelty they don't show you. History books don't show you the screams. They don't show the children frozen alive in Stalingrad, or the villagers burned in Lidice, or the prisoners crushed inside Unit 731 labs. Not with bullets, but with experiments. In Eastern Europe, the Germans used human shields. In the Pacific, the Japanese used live civilians for bayonet training. But cruelty wasn't one-sided. The Allies firebombed Dresden, killing 25,000 civilians in a night, most of them women and children. August 6, 1945, 8:15 a.m. Hiroshima. The sky is clear, quiet, ordinary. Then, impact, a flash, a roar. And 80,000 lives vanish in seconds. The bomb was called Little Boy, but there was nothing small about what followed. 3 days later, August 9th, 1945, 11:02 a.m., Nagasaki. Fat Man was dropped, another bomb, another city erased, another 40,000 lives gone, instantly. But most didn't die in that moment. They died slowly, from fire, from ash, from radiation that clung to their bodies like a curse. This wasn't just war, it was a warning. To the world, to history, to anyone who thought strategy had limits. War had become a theater, and human lives, they were just props on the stage. The winners hired the villains. In 1945, the Allies won. But what happened next is the part history skips. Instead of putting Nazi scientists on trial, the US gave them new names, new jobs, and brought them here. This was Operation Paperclip. Over 1,600 former Nazis, many of whom had overseen horrific experiments, were recruited to work in America's space program, military labs, and intelligence agencies. The man who built Hitler's rockets became the man who launched NASA. The doctors who experimented on prisoners went to work on mind control programs like MK Ultra. Tell me again, who really won the war? The horror didn't end. It just changed its name. Strategy, deception, and game theory. War wasn't chaos. It only looked that way. Beneath every explosion was a decision. Behind every front line on a blueprint. This wasn't emotion. It was a calculation. Hitler was baited. The Allies let him take pieces of Czechoslovakia, not because they were weak, but because they wanted him confident, overextended. Stalin watched Poland bleed, not out of fear, but because he needed time, and blood was the currency. By 1938, Germany was running war simulations. Game theory on paper, lives as numbers. Britain, they didn't just fight, they performed. They fed Hitler false intel, fake troop locations, fake invasions. They built entire phantom armies out of rubber and lies. D-Day, the greatest invasion in modern history, was won before the first soldier hit the beach. Fake radio signals, inflatable tanks, misdirection on a global scale. What did you see in the movies? That was theater. What you didn't see, that was how the war was scripted. Every death, every move, every accident, cold, precise, predicted. And when the board was set, they played it like a game, but the pieces weren't plastic. They were human. The quiet questions. Some questions were never answered, not because they didn't matter, but because they made the victors uncomfortable. Why weren't Nazi banks bombed, even once? They funded genocide, but their walls stood untouched. Why did corporations that armed the enemy, walk free? Steel, oil, ammunition. They profited from death and faced no trials. Why did history books skip entire massacres? Entire villages erased, and no one turned the page back to look. Why were some Nazi scientists flown to safety instead of prison? Because they had skills, or because they had secrets? Why were post-war trials so selective? Some monsters were punished, others protected, promoted, given new names, and new governments. Maybe the truth was too dark, too complicated, too inconvenient. Or maybe the ones who won the war, they were the same ones who rewrote what it meant. Closing, why it still matters. They told you World War II was good versus evil, heroes versus villains, a clean ending, with justice served. But history isn't clean, and the deeper you dig, the more you realize the truth didn't die in the war. It was buried after it, because behind the flags and victory speeches, there were secret deals, untold deaths, and rewritten timelines. The real battle? It wasn't just on the front lines, it was in the boardrooms, courtrooms, newsrooms. And here's the part they'll never admit. The people who won the war also won the right to tell the story. This is Dark Decoded X. We don't chase nostalgia. We chase truth no matter how uncomfortable. So if you've ever looked at the world and thought, something feels off, you're not alone. You're just waking up. Like if it made you think. Comment if it shook you, and subscribe to Dark Decoded X. The truth doesn't scream, it waits, in silence, for those willing to look.